beyond the grave. For millions of people around the world, the concept of the afterlife is relatively simple. When a person dies, their soul leaves the physical body behind and travels to a spiritual realm. Modern culture often pictures this as an eternity spent as ethereal spirits, floating in a distant heaven, forever separated from the physical world. But when we examine the ancient biblical texts, a startling contradiction emerges. The central hope of the early Christians was not the escape of the soul from the body. It was the resurrection of the dead. This distinction is not just a minor theological detail. It represents one of the most profound shifts in human history regarding how we understand life, death, and the physical universe. So what exactly does the Bible mean by the resurrection of the dead? And how did the modern idea of a purely spiritual eternity replace the original, highly physical promise found in the ancient scriptures? To understand the magnitude of this mystery, we have to look at the world in which the biblical texts were written. In the ancient Mediterranean world, physical death was widely considered a permanent defeat. For the ancient Greeks and Romans, the afterlife was often viewed as a shadowy, ghostly existence. The famous philosopher Plato taught that the physical body was essentially a prison for the immortal soul. According to this view, death was the moment of ultimate liberation. The ultimate goal was to shed the material world entirely and escape into a realm of pure spirit. Early Jewish thought held a very different perspective, though it also painted a somber picture of death. The earliest texts of the Hebrew Bible speak of a place called Sheol. This was not a place of torment, but a place of silence and shadows where the dead rested away from the land of the living. But as centuries passed, a new revelation began to unfold within the Jewish tradition. The prophets began to speak not just of a shadowy existence, but of a future where God would defeat death itself. We see the clearest early example of this in the book of Daniel, chapter 12. The text declares that multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. This was not a promise of souls floating away. It was a bold claim that the physical dust of human remains would be reconstituted, reanimated, and restored to conscious life. By the time of the 1st century, this belief had become a major point of debate. The Jewish religious leaders known as the Pharisees believed strongly in a future physical resurrection. Another group, the Sadducees, rejected the idea entirely. This was the explosive cultural environment into which the early Christian movement was born. But the followers of Jesus of Nazareth did not just teach the resurrection as a distant, future event at the end of time. They claimed that the resurrection had already begun in the middle of history with one specific man. The foundational claim of the Christian faith was that the tomb of Jesus was empty. And more importantly, they insisted that he was not a ghost. When the early disciples proclaimed that Jesus had risen from the dead, they were making a specific, highly controversial historical claim. In the ancient world, many people claimed to have seen visions of the dead. Encounters with spirits were a common part of ancient folklore. If the apostles had simply said that Jesus was alive in their hearts, or that his spirit had returned to God, no one in the Roman Empire would have been deeply offended. It would have been understood as a typical religious sentiment. But that is not what the original documents say. The accounts recorded in the Gospels insist on physical details that deliberately challenge the idea of a purely spiritual afterlife. They describe a figure who could be touched, who possessed scars that could be examined, and who asked for food to prove he was not an apparition. Yet, at the same time, the texts describe a body that behaved in ways that defy our normal understanding of physics. This raises a crucial question about the nature of this restored life. If the biblical resurrection is fundamentally physical, what kind of body is the text actually describing? Continuo para approxima parte dois. To answer the question of what a resurrected body actually is, we have to look closely at the earliest detailed explanation we possess. This explanation does not come from the Gospel accounts themselves, which were written down later, but from a letter written by the Apostle Paul around the year 54. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 15, is the most extensive treatment of the resurrection found in the entire Bible. The early Christians living in the Greek city of Corinth were deeply struggling with this concept. Because of their specific cultural background, which heavily valued the spiritual realm and despised the physical body, they found the idea of a physical resurrection confusing and even repulsive. They asked Paul a highly logical question. How are the dead raised, and with what kind of body will they come? Paul answers by using a simple agricultural metaphor. He compares a buried human body to a seed planted in the ground. When you plant a bare seed, like a grain of wheat, what ultimately grows out of the earth looks entirely different from what was buried. Yet, it remains the exact same organism. The original seed dies, but it is transformed into something far more glorious. Paul argues that the present human body is perishable, weak, and mortal. But the resurrected body, he claims, is imperishable, powerful, and immortal. Here is where centuries of modern misunderstanding begin. In his letter, Paul describes the future resurrected state as a spiritual body. For a modern reader, the phrase spiritual body sounds like a complete contradiction. It sounds exactly like a ghost or an invisible phantom. But scholars of ancient Greek point out that this is a fundamental translation issue. When Paul uses the word spiritual in this specific text, he is not describing the material that the body is actually made of. He is describing the energy that animates it. Just as a steam engine is a physical machine powered by steam, Paul is arguing that the resurrected physical body is perfectly animated and sustained by the Spirit of God, rather than by normal, fragile biological processes. This understanding becomes essential when we look at the specific language the early Christians used. The Greek word found throughout the New Testament for resurrection is anastasis. In the ancient Mediterranean world, whether you were a pagan, a Jew, or a Christian, everyone knew exactly what anastasis meant. It meant bodies getting up out of graves. Pagans insisted that anastasis was completely impossible. The Jewish Pharisees believed it would happen to everyone at the end of history. The early Christians claimed it had surprisingly already happened to Jesus in the middle of history. But nobody in any ancient text ever used the word anastasis to mean a soul escaping a physical body to go to heaven. The concept was unavoidably material. This physical reality perfectly aligns with the strange and dramatic accounts found in the Gospels. In the Gospel of Luke, When the risen Jesus suddenly appears to his disciples in a locked room, they are completely terrified. The text specifically notes that they thought they were seeing a ghost. Jesus corrects them by inviting them to physically touch his hands and his feet. He explicitly states that a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as they can clearly see he has. To prove his physical reality even further, he asks for something to eat. The disciples hand him a piece of broiled fish, and he eats it right in front of them. A ghost does not eat fish. A collective hallucination does not consume physical food. The biblical text goes out of its way to emphasize that whatever happened to Jesus on Easter morning, it involved his actual physical corpse. The tomb was empty because the body was no longer there. It had been fundamentally transformed. We see this exact same emphasis in the Gospel of John, where the Apostle Thomas is invited to physically examine the crucifixion scars. The severe wounds remain, proving a direct continuity. It is the old body, made entirely new. Yet, this same resurrected body is described as behaving in ways we cannot fully comprehend, appearing in locked rooms and vanishing from sight at will. Early Christians did not believe Jesus had simply been resuscitated back to normal mortal life, only to die again later. As prominent historians of early Christianity have pointed out, the original believers did not view resurrection as simply life after death. They viewed it as life after death. They believed his body had passed entirely through death and emerged as the ultimate prototype of a new physical creation. This radical claim changed absolutely everything. If the ultimate destiny of humanity is not to leave the material universe forever, but to live in transformed physical bodies on a renewed earth, then the standard modern view of heaven is missing half the story. But if the Bible truly teaches a physical resurrection on a restored planet, a massive question remains. What actually happens to a person immediately after they close their eyes in death? And how exactly did the modern church replace this ancient physical hope with the popular image of eternal spirits floating eternally in the clouds? Continuo para proxima part tres. To answer the question of what happens immediately after death, we must distinguish between the final destination and what theologians call the intermediate state. When the Apostle Paul writes about his own potential death, he does not say he will immediately receive his resurrected body. Instead, he says that he desires to depart and be with Christ, which he describes as better by far. Similarly, when Jesus speaks to the criminal on the cross in the Gospel of Luke, he says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." But in the context of first-century Judaism, paradise was not the final stop. It was considered a peaceful, conscious resting place for the dead as they awaited the ultimate day of resurrection. The early Christians believed that those who died were safe in the presence of God, but they were still waiting. In the book of Revelation, the souls of the martyrs in heaven are actually depicted as crying out, asking God how long it will be until ultimate justice is brought to the earth. They are at peace, but the narrative implies they are waiting for something more. For the ancient biblical writers, a permanent human existence without a physical body was completely unnatural. It was a temporary consequence of death, not the original design for human life. So how did this temporary resting place become the ultimate final goal in the minds of most modern believers? The answer lies in a dramatic cultural shift that occurred as Christianity spread outward from its Jewish origins and into the broader Greco-Roman world. As the early movement grew across the Roman Empire, it attracted many Greek thinkers who had been raised on the philosophy of Plato. For a cultured Greek intellectual in the 2nd or 3rd century, the idea of a physical resurrection seemed entirely backward. Why would a pure soul, having finally escaped the heavy, decaying prison of the physical body, ever want to return to it? Over the following centuries, the original Jewish understanding of a renewed physical creation began to slowly fade. As the Church progressed through the Middle Ages, popular theology became deeply saturated with Greek philosophy. The focus of preaching and teaching shifted away from the resurrection of the dead at the end of time, and moved almost entirely to the state of the individual soul immediately after death. Masterpieces of medieval literature, like Dante's Divine Comedy, cemented the popular imagination of a highly detailed, purely spiritual heaven and hell. The physical resurrection became a theological footnote. It remained officially acknowledged in ancient church creeds, but it was largely forgotten in everyday devotion and popular belief. Yet, when we look closely at the climax of the biblical narrative, it is intensely earthly. The final chapters of the Bible do not describe millions of human souls leaving the earth to fly up to a distant spiritual realm forever. Instead, Revelation chapter 21 describes the exact opposite. The visionary text describes the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. A loud voice from the throne declares that God's dwelling place is now among humanity, and he will dwell with them on the earth. This final vision represents the complete restoration of the physical universe. It portrays a world where heaven and earth overlap and matter and spirit are perfectly integrated. It is a physical reality where death, mourning, crying, and pain have permanently passed away. In the biblical view, the physical material world is not a tragic mistake that God eventually throws into the fire so he can rescue spiritual souls. The physical world is considered inherently good, carefully created by God, and destined for ultimate rescue, purification, and transformation. The resurrection of Jesus was seen by early Christians as the very first prototype of that massive cosmic restoration. The textual evidence shows that the earliest Christians held a belief far more radical than what is commonly taught today. They did not long for an escape from reality. They hoped for the profound healing of reality. What the biblical texts actually promise is a renewed humanity, living in transformed, immortal physical bodies within a completely restored physical universe. The tradition of souls finding immediate peace in heaven remains a valid part of historic Christian theology, but strictly as an intermediate state. The original ultimate hope of the ancient texts was always the total defeat of death itself through the physical resurrection of the body. Recognizing this ancient truth changes how we understand the very nature of human destiny and the value of the physical world we live in today. If you would like the next investigation to examine exactly what the ancient world meant when they used the word paradise, leave the word paradise in the comments below.